Let me start with a question for you. Does anonymity bother you? Might be an odd question, but does being anonymous, being people maybe don't recognize your name, does that bother you? I think there are some people that probably would bother. There are others that probably won't. There's people that I have worked with that, when they walked in, it was almost, don't you know who I am kind of a thing, right? And some people carry that in with them. But for some, it doesn't matter at all. But I want to think for just a minute about all the people that you know. If I were to say, list all the people that you know, that would be a long task for us to complete. What about if I were to ask you all the people that know you? Well, that would be an impossible task because there are people that will come up and say to you, hello, glad to see you. And you're thinking the whole time, who is this person? Or, Cindy, you can relate to this if you're a school teacher. When did I have this kid? And they come up when they're 30, and you remember when they were 14, and they look completely different, and you're thinking, who is this person, right? Who is this? So when we think about anonymity, sometimes we know a lot of people, but there are a lot of people that we don't, and sometimes people know us, but we don't know them. But if you want to add to that list, think about all the people that you know that have passed away. If we're 40 years old, odds are we've known a lot of people that have passed away. If you're 70 or 90, that number only gets bigger, right? So there's a lot of people that we know that are no longer with us. Dad talks about his grandparents from time to time. And I sort of feel like I know them, but I never knew them. They were all four dead 10 to 15 years before I was born. You may have people in your life that way. People that you don't know, never knew, feel like you do know because somebody. Bottom line, what's happened to your list? It's gotten really big, right? List has gotten big. 100 years from now, how many people will know you? Not many. There'll be, some of you are the grandparent that your grandkids will be talking about, but it'll be hard pressed. 1,000 years from now, not a soul will know us. Now, I don't mean that to be negative. I don't mean saying that as time sort of progresses through, this is what happens. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to say something I doubt I've ever said up here. Turn to 1 Chronicles in your Bible. Odds are it's page 365 if you don't know where it is. But turn to 1 Chronicles. I want you to turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 1 for a specific reason. Tell you what, I'm going to give you about 10 seconds, and I want you to yourself to just start reading 1 Chronicles chapter 1. Going well, right? Going well. All right. Some of us aren't there. I should have waited. That was poor on the teacher part of me to not wait till everybody was there. But I've made it hard for one reason. We had to go to a book that we don't ever go to. It's easy to find Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Psalms. 1 Chronicles is a little hard to read. But now that you're there, look at the first chapter of that and read. It's a lot of names, right? There's a whole lot of names. And if we're being honest, there's a lot of names there that we can't even try to pronounce, right? This is going to get, if you have to read very much, I don't know how many of you have glasses, but by the end of that chapter, we'll all need them, right? Because our eyes are going to be crossed by how many names that we're seeing. So if we look at 1 Chronicles, there's a whole lot of names listed there. If you go to 1 Chronicles chapter 1 and verse 17, you'll see Shem. He was Noah's son. Now, okay, I know that one. I remember that. Noah had 3 sons. There's one of them. If you go on into 1 Chronicles chapter 4 and verse 1, you'll see Judah. That's one of that was a son of Jacob. So I was like, well, okay, I know that Jacob had a bunch of kids. So, okay. Let me give you another one. 1 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 3, you'll see Obadiah and Joel, and you're like, ta-da, I know those. Those are books in the Old Testament, but you're wrong. They are books in the Old Testament, but that's a different Obadiah and a different Joel than the ones that you know. Now, Why do I mention this? Well, a lot of times when we read names, they just sort of wash right over us. We don't know anything about them. I pointed out two there that you knew a little bit about, two that you thought you knew, but you actually had them wrong. But those of you whose eyes got real big when I said go to First Chronicles, there's a lot more than 4 names right there. There's a whole bunch of names that you don't know. You ever seen a tombstone that said known only to God? You ever seen that before? There's a lot of people that are on that First Chronicles list that you would say are known only to God. It's kind of like strolling around a cemetery that you've never been to before. Those names mean something specific to some people, but they mean very little to you who are just happening to see them. I think I'd rather be anonymous to man and known only to God. And I want us to talk about that a little bit this morning. We went through the apostles. I think we've covered 8 of them. And we've all joked about how that when we get to the end of the apostles, it's going to get kind of difficult. We're going to talk about 3 apostles today. 3 that are almost non-existent in the Bible. If you were young or taught Bible school or class, you may remember the song about the apostles. And it said that Jesus called them one by one, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And there's a lot of information about them. Peter, Andrew, James, and John, Philip, and Bartholomew, Doubting Thomas, Matthew. We've covered all of them, right? Yes, Jesus. I think the reason we go into the chorus in yes, Jesus called them is you got to get ready for the next set, right? Yes, Jesus called them, and they all followed him. James, the son of Alphaeus, Simon, and also Thaddeus. Apostle was Judas. Now, here's the thing. We're going to talk about James, the son of Alphaeus, Simon, and also Thaddeus today. And truth be told, if we were only going to read from the Bible about what we know about them, we'll be done here in about 3 minutes. So how is it that a modern-day Christian could learn from 3 apostles when there's really no information about them? Well, let's talk about that here today. Let's talk about the first one. This is James, the son of Alphaeus, as the song goes. Only mentioned in the 4. All we can say for sure about him is he had a pretty common name, right? There's James, a fairly common name in the Bible. And we can say that James, he was the son of Alphaeus. This comes up fairly often in Bible names, that people are named something son of. We do the same thing today, although not exactly the same way. Do you know any juniors or any seconds or thirds? It's the same sort of thing. In the Bible, especially in the Hebrew Bible, a lot of times it would say that something bar something else. Simon, blessed art thou, Simon bar Jonah, right? Simon, son of Jonah. That's what the bar meant. This could be James bar Alphaeus, although these are Greek names that we would use right here. But James, the son of Alphaeus, we see him mentioned right here. All we know about him is speculation. Main question surrounding him is he maybe another James in the Bible? Well, let's think about it for just a second. We already had one apostle, right? James and John. James, the son of Zebedee, right? James and John, the sons of thunder, the son of Zebedee. Well, his name is James, the son of Zebedee. Can it be this one? This is James, the son of Alphaeus. So I don't think it's going to be this one. All right? So maybe we can guess that it's not that. We also know in the Gospels that Jesus had at least 4 brothers. I'll let you turn right now, if you want to Matthew chapter 13 and verse 55, or you can go to Mark chapter 6 and verse 3. Either one's fine. But in both of those, Matthew 13 and verse 55, it's going to tell you that Jesus had brothers. All right? Jesus had brothers. Matthew 13 and verse 55, it says, and they're asking, this is when people starting to wonder who Jesus was, but 55, it says, is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? Well, the answer to both of those questions is what? Yes, Jesus' father was a carpenter. Jesus' mother is called Mary. And they said, and his brothers, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. They got Jesus pretty well pegged here, right? This is kind of like what we would say. I know who your mom is. I know who your dad is. I know who your brothers are. For a lot of these people, they probably remembered those 4 little boys running around in circles out in the community, right? They know who they are. Mark chapter 6 and verse 3 asks the same questions. They even mentioned, are his sisters not here with us as well? But if James in the apostle, James the son of Alphaeus, is James the son of Alphaeus, and that probably means his dad wasn't Joseph, who's Jesus' dad. So now we've went through a couple of Jameses, and we've resolved that that's probably not who this is. We also know from the Gospel of Mark that when Jesus was hung on the cross, there was a man there. If you'll turn to Mark chapter 15 and verse 40, there was a man there that they referred to as James the Less. Mark chapter 15 and verse 40, there were also women looking on from afar, and among those whom were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Less, and of Joseph, and of Salome. Well, there's just enough information there to get us confused as well. What does James the Less mean? Well, translated, it could be an age thing. You know, we could separate into the older and the younger, right? We could separate into the more and to the less by age. It could be his height, right? You ever heard anybody in your family referred to as the big one and the small one? You know, Big John, Little John? Dad had a cousin whose name was Little. They called him Little, and he's the biggest one of all. Sometimes we can get them flipped around, right? That kind of thing happens a little bit as well. It could be important. Sometimes we see this with kings or with leaders, the great, the less. Bottom line, Mark chapter 15 and verse 40 just sort of mentions it, and we move on. Those descriptions, though, sort of fall flat as the person's gone. Go back to that cemetery for a second. There are people buried in the cemetery that were called 100 different nicknames, and we don't know any of them. All the names that you've been called, people will know that for right now. But 100 years from now, be hard-pressed to know it, and 1,000 years from now, not at all. See, I'd imagine James the son of Alphaeus, or James the Less, was pretty well known in his time. And we know almost nothing about him today. Well, let's go to the second one. What about Simon? Simon the Zealot. He's only mentioned in the names and the list of the apostles. We know almost nothing about him. What we do know, this moniker, the Zealot, is even ambiguous enough that doesn't even help us describe who he is. You ever heard the word zealot or zealous before? You may have heard that. Well, there was a group of Jewish people, a sect, that were known as the Zealots. And they were bent on revolution. They were looking for a Messiah that would rise up and that would overthrow Rome. Might he have been part of this group? Who knows? Could have been. Maybe zealot means something else. Might he have been just zealous for the Mosaic law. This is the law that we have. There were a lot of people in Jesus' time that were zealous for the Mosaic law. They wanted to fuss at Jesus quite often because what Jesus didn't always seem to jive with the letter of the law. Jesus had this concept of grace that the law didn't always have. Maybe he came from that. Maybe he was just zealous for the teaching of Jesus. Maybe he was more interested in Jesus' teaching than any of the other 11. Who knows, right? We have no idea. But I would imagine that Simon was an important apostle in the 12. We know nothing about him. By the way, one of Jesus' brothers was named Simon as well. All right. Well, let's go to the third one. Every part of me wanted to title this also Thaddeus, just because that's how the song goes. But I just titled it Thaddeus. But in the song, you sing also Simon, also Thaddeus, right? Well, how true was that? Well, it's true, but it was true at times, because here are various names that he also went by. He also was called Jude of James, or Jude the son of James. He was called Judas the son of James. He was called Thaddeus. He was called Judas Thaddeus. He was called Levius, all right? All of those are names that were used. We talked a second ago about all the names that are used for you. How hard would it be to do genealogy on somebody who has 20 different names? Dad's done a lot of that in his time. Now, he says sometimes they get a little cross, right? A lot of these names that are being used right here. Jude might actually be the correct name, or the most commonly used name. In Matthew chapter 10, verses 2 through 4, Mark chapter 3, 16 through 19, Jude appears to be referred to as Thaddeus. They appear in the same place on the list of the apostles, and they're consistent. So it's just sort of assumed that they are the same person, Jude or Thaddeus. Why did they maybe call him Thaddeus and not Jude? Well, who knows, right? The name Judas ends up with the sort of negative connotation, right? I'd say there were a lot of people after Jesus was killed is like, my name's not Judas. I don't want to go by that, right? You know, there's a episode of Seinfeld, and Elaine is dating a guy, and he is the same name as a serial killer. And so she has to be quiet and not tell who. Everybody's like, you're dating this? No, I'm not dating the serial killer. Sometimes a name gets a negative connotation there, right? We have to be careful that maybe that's why they didn't call him Judas quite as much. But that's a common name in the Bible. A minute ago, we mentioned Jesus' brothers. There was a Jude and Jesus' brothers. I'd never thought about that until I was getting this lesson ready. That the three names of the three uncommon apostles that we know nothing about, they share the same name, the three of Jesus' four brothers. That's kind of a wild thing. I don't think it's the same person, though. John chapter 7, verse 3 to 5. Read here with me a second. Jesus' brothers therefore said to him, depart from here and go into Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you are doing. For no one does anything in secret, while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. For even his brothers did not believe him. So right here, Jesus has already called his 12 apostles, but the brothers, according to that verse, didn't believe him at the time. So none of these three would be his brothers. But that only complicates things, right? Because sometimes it's easy to say, I don't know Ben's brother, but I know Ben, right? And I can make a connection there, but we don't even have that right here. So these three men, these three apostles, are almost by definition anonymous to you and me. We know almost nothing about them other than their name. So let's think about this for me and you today. Let's think about this as what I've called here participants in Christianity. I think we would all be considered participants in Christianity. Let's start. The 12 apostles chosen by Jesus were clearly some of the most important people in the history. Jesus chose all 12 of them. And a full 25% of them we don't know anything about at all. That's a quarter. 1/4 of the apostles, and we barely know their names and nothing else. Individuals, me and you, each of us, are part of Christianity. No matter how small or unknown our name would be. A friend of mine, one time, we were going to do something, and it was on a Sunday or a Wednesday. I don't remember what it was. And he said, I will pick you up after church. I said, just swing by the church, and I will get in the car with you. So he parked across the street, and all these people are coming out. And as I'm one of the last ones out, he told me when I got in the car, he said, I don't think I recognize any of those people. He'd lived in Lancaster his whole life, and it was church in Lancaster. But think about that. How many times do you go to the store and you think, I've never seen any of these people before? There's a lot of people in the world, and we don't always know everybody. Well, the church is sometimes the same way. There's a lot of people in the church, both here and outside, that we maybe don't really know. We're not that familiar with. They're unknown. We might even view them in some ways as anonymous, for a term that we used a few moments ago. None of your names, at least your actual names, are in the Bible. Bible was written long before us. So some of those people in First Chronicles, they got their name on the list, right? We don't know them. And then our name's not in there either. It's written somewhere else. Turn to Revelation chapter 21 and verse 27. See, this one's easier. First Chronicles was way up in there somewhere. This one's at the very end. Y'all find this one easy. Revelation chapter 21 and verse 27. But there shall by no means enter it anything that defiles, this is heaven, or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. Not written in the Bible. There's a bunch of names written in the Bible. There's bad people's names written in the Bible. But it doesn't matter that our name isn't written there. It doesn't matter that we're anonymous to the Bible, that we're anonymous to people as we walk out into the community who maybe haven't seen us before. But what matters is what's written there in verse 27 of Revelation chapter 21, that we are listed in the Lamb's book of life. Because what that really is the heaven roster, right? There's a place for you there. And it doesn't matter what your name is, as long as there's a place for you. God knows me and you as individuals. When he listed when people list in First Chronicles, some of those names are anonymous. God knows all of those people, right? The First Chronicles list, the apostles list, this list, or your directory, or whatever it might would be. But it's good for us to remind ourselves that while we may be unknown to some people, we're not unknown to God. He knows all there is to know about us. And the most important person in history, shouldn't use the word person, but if the most important being in history knows all about us, well, that's way more than the person parked beside us at Walmart, right? That's way more important than the person that we cross paths coming in and out of the bank, or the person that turns in front of us on the road. Those things don't matter. I don't need to walk into a place. He knows who I am. That's far more important than anything else. No matter how we feel about ourselves, no matter how big or maybe how small our contributions are, they're important to God, and that matters. We might remain relatively unknown throughout our lives. There are people that have gained fame late in their careers. Read about and seen people who were authors and they've written 10 books and 20 people read them. They had no fame at all. And then all of a sudden they write a book and it becomes a bestseller and everybody just knows them right then and there. There are some people that are the other way. They gain a sense of fame when they're young and they never do anything else the rest of their life. But people know. But unknown and anonymous can be different things. We might be unknown in our community. We might be even unknown as a member of the church, and I hope that we're not. But we're not unknown to God. We're not anonymous to God. And just like the three apostles, who I know worked hard, labored, probably went through difficulties, good chance they probably were killed, and now 2,000 years later we look back and say, I don't even know who they are, right? Don't worry about what's the struggle right now. The reward is what we saw at the end of Revelation. The reward is there for us because we might be unknown to those, but we're not unknown to God. If there's anything that we can do for you, any way that we can help you get to that home in heaven, whatever it is, we invite you to come while we stand and sing. standing at your door. Joy to you he will restore, and his name you will adore. Let him ring, now is the heavenly care. Let him ring, he will make for you a feast. Let him ring, he will seek your sin for you, and with earth thy sorrow he will take you home to heaven. Let him ring. Those of you who came here with me today, you listen to me. I really enjoyed being last year like this. This is the church. A lot of the early forms of bringing it back. Really did a fantastic job. Usually we were all over the end of earlier. You are the words and the music. You are the song that I sing. You are the melody. You are the harmony. Praising your name I will bring. You are the Lord of Lords. You are the mighty God. You are the King of all kings. So now I get back to you, the song that you gave to me. You are the song that I sing.
Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for people take giving us will keep on different days like this church. We thank you for rain, the sunshine, and we want to keep all the simple ones in the minds and the prayers up. They get the prayer prayers for the event church. We pray for Brenda, for Tracy Nines, for Boo, and we'll take Daniel for his lesson, Kevin for song needing, and we'll be for Venus' next anniversary, and hope everyone has a safe trip home, and Merry Christmas, and that's all day. And we ask in Jesus' name we pray, amen.